podcast, Welcome of Change. I'm very happy to be here with Mindy, who is also interested in this very fascinating topic of systems and family systems in particular, and how they affect us in ways that we don't even know about it. And before this podcast, and before I get into letting Mindy introduce herself, I was curious. I looked at what AI says about what this is. You ready for this? All right, I'm going to read it.
Let's hear it.
Welcome to our, the AI says it is a pseudo-scientific therapeutic approach involving acting out family dynamics to help clients understand their psychological issues. Okay, I am not a real fan of AI, but there are 5 things that are actually wrong. It's not pseudo-scientific, number 1. It's actually scientific in many ways. It's not therapy. We'll get into this maybe at some point, maybe not today, another point. It is not acting out. This is the whole point of it, right? Understanding, yes, but it's not like, oh, I now have a new story. Yes, that's true too, but it's actually way more. We'll get into that. And it's not just psychological issues, right?
Nope.
Well, we'll get to that. So there are like 5 points that AI got wrong. Welcome to the end of the thought process, right?
Well, obviously AI has not experienced a family constellation.
Yeah. So that's why we're here. We are wanting to explore what this really actually is. My name is Sabine O'Loughlin. I am your host. I am a family constellation facilitator. And this is Mindy Schrager. And she will talk about herself a little bit in terms of what is she doing, how she got here, what prompted you to explore this thing. So tell us a little bit about you and how you got interested in this, Mindy.
Okay. Hi, Sabine. So let's see, how did I get interested in this? I went to a massage therapist who said, well, there's this couple down the street doing this really interesting technique around family. If you have any issues with your family, you might want to go check it out. And at the time, I was having a bit of an issue with my mom. So I went and I attended the session and I had an interesting experience and almost never went back. But then something changed and I did go back and I've been doing it ever since. But really it was because I am intrigued by looking at different approaches that may get at issues that we can't look at from sort of a linear perspective. And so I was curious. And then that curiosity led to, doing multiple workshops and then ultimately getting trained and then training with someone else and then facilitating and then training some more and then facilitating some more. And so that's the story.
Great. So people who don't know us, they don't know you, they don't know me. Tell them a little bit about you, like little personal stuff that you wouldn't mind sharing that might be interesting, pertinent. What's sort of your background?
Okay. So my background is up until about, I guess it's now 10 years ago, I was in corporate doing change management, actually. So working with teams in different parts of the organization to drive systematic change, I guess you would say. And along the way, I discovered some health issues and some interpersonal issues. And so I started a journey. And it didn't start with family constellations, but family constellations has become a really key piece of it. So then about 10 years ago, I left corporate, started doing this work along with shadow work and a color system called Orsoma. And so again, there we have the system word because systems show up everywhere. So I've been on this personal transformational journey for multiple decades, shall we say.
Yeah.
How about you? How about you? A little bit about you.
Well, I did not get into this work with my permission. It seemed like it was an accidental occurrence because I had a little judgment about this kind of stuff, which I thought I knew what this kind of stuff was. I didn't. And so I was in the right place at the right time. I had signed up for another course and was there. And I got basically invited to participate in one of these sessions. And I only did it because I happened to be there, and I had miscalculated something else. And I was fighting it for a whole weekend. I was sitting there and I thought, okay, this has got to be nonsense. I'm sitting there. I do not want to be around people who seem to be emoting, that seem kind of sissy, like flu, fluffa. Like, I don't want any part of this. But then something happened at the end when I got asked if I wanted to do a little setup myself. And I really, with all the arrogance and like this, I tell you what, this is not going to work on me. Set it up, and something really happened. It just kind of blew my mind. I really kind of lost it. I thought I had control over how I am. Not at all. Something happened. Something really opened up, and it went on for 2 days.
Wow.
And I was crying, which at the time, that was really like a nightmare for me, like crying in public. Like, seemed like, oh my God, this is like, no. But it really opened up something, and it really opened up a curiosity, like, how did that happen? And I got so curious that I really then pursued it. And that Mindy and I actually share the teachers who introduced us to this, right? Peter and Jamie Faust. Thank you to you guys, because it was a life.
Big thank yous to them.
Absolutely. So that's how it was an accidental thing. And then I tried to find this kind of work anywhere I possibly could, because I was tapping into something that I just had no real words for it. So maybe we ought to talk a little bit about, what this actually is.
Okay.
Like what exactly is, maybe you ought to share, maybe can you share some of that? What is it? What do we do? How do we do it?
So sometimes it's difficult to explain it exactly what it is. But for me, it's a way of, and it doesn't just apply to organization, to families. It also applies to organizations. And also you can do simple exercise just to give you information from sort of a different place. So sort of as the baseline of what is a family constellation, it's a way of looking at patterns within a family system and it can go multiple generations back. It's not just family of origin, although oftentimes we start looking at family of origin or one line of the family or the other line of the family, and bring in an issue and look at where that issue may have started from, because we know that we bring in more than just us. We bring in our families with us. And so it's a way of, as I've heard it, it's about dimensionalizing an issue by bringing in elements that may be part of the cause of a pattern that is keeping us stuck, or doing, being in a situation where we can't move forward because we're repeating patterns of the past. That's part of why we came up with echoes of change, is because what are we echoing in our life and in future generations by holding on to patterns from the past.
So take a listener who's never experienced any of this before, right? Take him through. So you walk into this room.
Yeah.
What happens?
Okay, so I can explain it from when I started, because when I first did one, I had no idea how it was going to work. And I ended up being the last person who did one. Yeah, you can relate to that. And people who were in the room had worked together before, so they had an understanding of each other and of the process. But basically and I don't even remember the first topic I came in with.
That's not really needed, right? You don't need to know anybody.
No, but it changes it has an impact on the flavor of the group. Yes. Because the group dynamic is also part of it, because the group also plays in. So anyway, I went to this workshop. At the time I, again, was having a challenge with my mother. And so we identified, we clarified what the issue was, and then identified elements. And I can't even remember all the elements, but one of them was my mother, of course. And for me, what was really fascinating is, as the system work unfolded, the person who was facilitating said something that was really kind of nasty. And I left and I said, I'm not coming back, and kept going through it in my head. And finally I called her And I said, during that constellation, you said something really mean. You sounded just like my mother. And she said, if I sounded like your mother, I was probably representing your mother. So please come back. And so speaking of representatives, what happens is, so you identify the issue, you identify the elements that could be part of that issue.
So you have to do all this, or they, or how? I mean,
well, it's so the facilitator helps you refine where the focus is for where you want to work, because you
come in and you say, I got an issue with my mother.
Yeah, so maybe it starts there, and then they clarify exactly, what's the issue, when did it start, and all that kind of thing. So you narrow it down. Is it something that is generational? Is it something in the family of origin? What is the pattern? And then you identify the elements that would be part of that pattern. And then you identify people in the room to be representatives of each of those elements. You place them.
So before you go on, explain maybe to the listeners, what is a representative, right?
Okay, so a representative.
That's one of the AI things that they said.
Yeah.
You play, what they say?
And actually, you don't act out. It's actually, that was one of the things, the challenges I had when I did the first one, was no one really explained what a representative was. And I also, as you talked about, had people in the room who were emoting. And at the time I was not, and probably still am not, a very emotive person. And so I was really questioning it. But really, I think the best way to explain it is to say, you stand in the place of whatever this element is. And it doesn't have to be a person. It could be a country. It could be an addiction. It could be any kind of element like that. And you just sort of settle and you breathe and you get information. And it's hard to describe how you get that information. But even like, I just recently did a workshop. Recently did a presentation and did a simple exercise so people could get a better feel for what is a representative. And I had them choose a person to represent a goal and a person to represent an element, an obstacle. And they could sense it. They could feel it. And I think actually another one of our co-teachers has a really good way of saying it. Judy says, if you're thinking it, don't say it. If you're feeling it, say it. So really the representative, it's like stepping into an information field in some ways, for lack of a better term, where information just flows through you. I remember in one, I was representing a little girl, a young girl. I'm not a young girl, so obviously I was representing a different energy than me. And all I kept wanting to do was say Disney, 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 and it turned out that she loved to go to Disney. So, Yeah,
and I think maybe that point might want to be made, because this is one of those subtleties of this representative, right? Because people, they come in and then somebody says, oh, will you represent my father or something? And then the person, when you're not, have never really gone through this, all your ideas about what is a father and whatnot, that will actually be activated in some kind of a way. And sometimes our own personal idea of what is a father might also inform what's going on. So it does also sometimes take a little bit of repetitive exposure to being a representative to say, I can actually be just sort of like a channel for whatever an exposure to the field is. That's really what it is, right?
Yeah, and I did one. I actually did a facilitated one where it was around money, and the person whose constellation it was had the representative for money stand way out in another room, because that's where she felt it was, disconnected. And the person who was representing money said, no, this isn't where I belong. But that person was in their head. They weren't in the representative. They weren't really solidly in the representative. And it can take time. I was uncomfortable being representative for a really long time because the role models I saw were people who were very emotive, and I was not very emotive. And it's like, so am I doing this right? But really, one of the things that I found is to do some simple introductory, what I call systemic exercises. And every time I do them, people get an understanding of what it is. It's really a feeling.
So how do you do a systemic exercise? How do you do that?
So I have one that I do pretty consistently now, where I have them identify. So the presentation I did was on self-care. So I had them identify a self-care goal. and then pick someone to represent that goal, and then they place them, and then see how close they could get to them, see what it felt like. Could they get right up to them? Did it feel like there was resistance? And then I had them identify someone to represent an obstacle, and then notice what changed for them when they placed the obstacle in the system. So it was adding another element. And in most cases, they then needed a resource to help work through the obstacle. And then they would identify an action out of what that resource gave them as information. And in the case, it was a short program, so there were two people who went through, and I heard from both of them, and they both indicated they got shifts from it. So it gives you a sense of, is the goal something that's achievable? Is there something in the way? If there's something in the way, what could you do that shifts it? Yeah. And it could be like there was one time I did that where the obstacle was a parent who had a perspective that was like, no, you can't do that.
So in essence, I think that if we could summarize this whole experience of the representative, it is actually a felt sense that is beyond the information that the person might have, the ideas that they might have, the projections and things that they might go on. And that has been something that's been absolutely mysterious and wonderful, and really quite probably the thing about the family constellation in the actual field, which, by the way, it actually works on Zoom too.
It does.
But it's like people repeatedly report as a representative, they have sensations, feelings, thoughts that they don't understand. It's not their stuff. It's not whoever, and it's just there. And that makes a representative different than somebody who is playing a role, because in playing a role, you have an idea of what the role is, and you're trying to be that. That's acting. This is not it. No,
this is you let it come to the surface. And I mean, we've talked about part of the reason I do the goal one is not everyone's comfortable bringing forward a family issue.
Correct.
I think it's important to also note you can use this in organizations, because organizations have family systems within them. We bring our families into the workplace, and there are systems within the organizations. And so, you don't have to have an emotion. The felt sense really is what provides the information, whether it's, looking at a process within an organization, or looking at a goal for personal, or working through a generational family thing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point maybe to make, is that the difference between a felt sense and an emotion is not the same thing. A felt sense is actually the matrix of everything that goes into it. And you may not see anything on the outside. I have a lot of stuff going on right now, but not a lot going out. Right? So it's the felt sense could be all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So so that's very good, and that's the role of these representatives, which is one of the reasons why family constellation is very different than Gestalt therapy or internal family systems, and all. Although they have relatedness, but it's just not the same thing.
Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, and oftentimes, that's my experience. I don't know how it yours, but being a representative for somebody else turns into something that is extremely helpful. I mean, when I was representing other people's fathers, I began to understand my own father, because it actually resonated with something in me, and I thought, oh, it's just.
Yeah, we see it all the time, where the perfect person gets chosen, whether it be someone like you who gets to see a better insight of their own parent, or I've seen it with people who have adoption within the system, and they get to represent someone who is adopted, or an adoptive parent, and it gives them a whole different perspective. And actually, just going through the process itself over time, I know for me, one of the big changes has been a different perspective. You get to see what your family member went through, and maybe why they made the choices they made, which may logically not make any sense to you. But when you get the felt sense of it, when you see it and you see the shifts, you get so much more in-depth insight. It's really, really amazing.
Yeah.
And in addition to what you get from being a representative, like you just described about the insights about your father, I think you also get insights from observing.
Absolutely.
So whether you're
Yeah,
doing a constellation,
that's a
observing it,
really
or
good
in it.
point, right? Like there's nobody who's just sitting there.
Yeah.
Nobody ever just sit there. They may think they're just sitting there, but they're all working. Everybody is involved in the field.
And it may not happen. I mean, it may not happen right away. Like, so for me, after that first constellation, it took me 6 months to go back and say, you sounded really mean, like my mother. And then my mother actually ended up doing one. It took her about 5 years to create a shift, but she was older and she was open to trying it.
Kudos to your mom for doing this. It takes, that's really sweet. I love that about your mom, that she would actually do that.
It was with Peter and Jamie. So
yeah, it's really, really sweet. Great. So if we kind of think about, so these people come into a room, you sit down, you have sort of a problem, an issue or something, then you pick these representatives, and then the facilitator does what?
So the facilitator does different things, but typically what they do is they check in with the different representatives to see what's coming up for them. Mm-hmm. So, what are you feeling? What happens when that element moves? And then there's so many different ways of doing constellations. Some of them are totally facilitated. Some of them are blind constellations, so you don't actually even know who you're representing. They're spirit mind constellations where people just move. But so if it's facilitated, you between you and the representative and the client would then create shifts in how the dynamic is set up. And then there would be words, some of them, we call them words of resolution, where it's about identifying and then shifting a pattern. Because part of it is that you can't just say, I'm going to do it differently. You have to acknowledge that our ancestors did what they did for a reason. And so you acknowledge them and then you ask permission to do it differently. So the facilitator is, looking at what are the different dynamics, what are the words that come up, and they're also part of the system. So they're feeling what's going on in the constellation, and they work it until it comes to a resolution point.
And
that's a very brief description.
Yeah, and sometimes it does not come to an obvious resolution, right. And that's just fine too, because it's not resolved at the level of which that particular one was worked, but it was sort of priming the system, right? It's like you kind of get in, you're like, okay, I'm never coming back. And then you're like, you were really mean. 6 months later, you're like, oh, this was perfect.
Yeah, because it's still working. It's still working. The system is still working. And I'm speaking of that, I remember one, we talk about how the people who came before us are bigger than us. They gave us birth, so they're bigger than we are from that point of view. And there was, which means, we, in some constellations that I've been in, we bow down to our parents as a way to honor them for giving us birth. And in there was this one person, she couldn't do it. She saw herself as bigger than her mother. And that was as far as the facilitator could take it. It brings in awareness. And then whatever happens next, it's sort of like I did the constellation, there was an awareness, and then it kept working for 6 months until I went back. And then I did, another one and another one and another one and infinite.
But yeah, and that sort of brings me sort of like, okay, and so the three principles of a family constellation, right? I mean, if I'm just going to go name them, like there's order, there's a balance of give and receive, and there is
belonging,
right? So these are the three principles, and you want to talk about maybe one of them, or what does it mean, or anything that maybe in that particular one that came up with your mom, or any other example you might have that might explain how.
Well, just from, having seen them now for many, many years, been in them, facilitated them, what I see show up the most is belonging. And the way that I see it show, I mean, the other ones show as well. I mean,
explain a little bit. What does it mean, belonging?
Okay, so the three principles. Belonging is everything in the system. Everyone and everything in the system has a right to belong. And if something is excluded intentionally or unintentionally, it will find a way to replicate and expand until it finds its way back into the system. Order means there's a particular order. So our parents came first, we came next, the eldest comes before we come. And that includes, again, it goes back to belonging. That includes elements in the system. Maybe there was a child who died young. That child is still part of the system. So that's order. And then balance of give and receive is that there needs to be an evenness between giving and receiving. So, for instance, if a parent is sick and a child ends up being a caretaker, they're both stepping out of order, but there's an imbalance in give and receive between them. But
and I think the interesting thing about the belonging I always find is like the people and things that belong to the system that one had no idea about. And that's one of the things that's really, really, really up these days. Like people who have been killed, murdered, otherwise by somebody in the system belong to the system. Every war brings more killed people. And so it's an ongoing accumulation of people who belong to the system, right?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things for me is that the thing that I've seen the most in constellations is exclusion. So the examples you just mentioned, people who died young, people who died in war, people who, during immigration got left behind in the country, miscarriages, all kinds of things where there's an exclusion. It's not necessarily intentional.
Correct. No,
a lot of it's
that's the thing, right? That's the whole thing about this family constellation is it's not necessarily intentional, and it's certainly not clear, right? It's unconscious, which is what this makes the unconscious conscious, because I was not aware that, for example, a miscarriage was an exclusion, for example, like if that's excluded, no. But then what happens to the excluded? What happens?
Well, you need to find a way to include them. Yeah. You need to find a way to include them. So, I mean, I know I've worked with people where one of the suggestions is to plant something in their memory. So there's something that grows in their memory, or bring in something that honors them in different ways. So, like I have an uncle who died young, and not in this country. And so my aunt had gifted me his pocket watch. I believe it's like the only thing from him that exists. So I have a shadow box that includes that, because the way of including him, even though he physically can't be included. Mm-hmm. So there are different ways you can do it. And the other thing that I'm finding more and more lately is that there are people where members of the family are actually not healthy to include physically, like people who are bipolar and this is not about, that all of those are bad, but sometimes there are situations when the person just is not healthy for the other person to be around. And so then you include them in you say, you're a part of my family, but I need a boundary to keep myself safe.
And so why is it important to explain that maybe a little bit? Why is it important to include them back? Why is that important?
Well, because again, they're part of the system. So if you exclude them, it's just the pattern's just going to continue to expand. It may hit another generation. So there may be separation that's created in a next generation.
So somebody might say, well, so what? I mean, like, why is that so important?
Because other things come in to fill in that exclusion.
Yeah.
Sometimes yeah.
And I think that point, and is may needs to be made. It's like, if we exclude something or somebody knowingly or unknowingly, and sometimes it's knowingly. You can look at the royal family, for example. They shoved off a couple of the sisters into mental institutes, not to be talked about again. They were clearly excluded, and their problems keep going in with the exclusion. But if we don't bring them in, somebody else, and this is why it's so bloody important, somebody else later in the system will try to bring them back in some kind of energetic way, in some way, by either being like them, getting sick like them, paying the debt like them, going to jail for them, whatever it is. And it's like somebody else is paying for the exclusion somewhere else.
And it goes back to that whole concept of loyalty to the family system. So if the system had that in it, and you say, okay, I'm cutting you out, then you've done something to the system, and the system's still trying to be loyal to the system, which is why, again, it's really important to acknowledge and then choose a different path. because as long as you acknowledge and then choose a different path, you're still being loyal to the system. You're asking it permission to stretch or to change. So really, really important to look at it that way.
Yes. So I think that's actually one of the points. And I'm looking at the time right now, and we're already at 30 minutes. We could go in for another 5 hours straight on, and we will, because this is only the first one on this teaser of what does family constellation actually potentially offer or not, and whatnot, and really exploring how this is, impacting you and your children, your health, money, livelihood, basically everything, right?
Yeah, every part of life.
So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how would they get in touch with you and learn more about this?
So I have a website, systemsofchange.com. Notice systems, because this is considered systems work. That's one way. That's an easy way. There's a connect button. They can schedule a 20-minute family constellation conversation with me. I have a couple of upcoming workshops. One of them's free. And any events like that would be listed on my website as well.
Great. And I will actually, and I will put the info in the show notes at the end.
Okay,
There's going to be a little thing so that they can, book your call with Mindy to find out more about it. And if nothing else, stay tuned, because we're planning to do these to, consistently more, every few weeks or so. So stay tuned for this and learn more about it. Get more interested in it. Get curious about it. Wonder if you've tried the same damn thing over and over and over again. Maybe it's
time to do something different. Yeah, right. It's really amazing work. Every time I see one, whether it's a small insight or a massively large insight, or one that takes place over time, it's amazing. It's amazing work.
I would say it's definitely saved my life.
Yeah,
and that's really not an overstatement.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Mindy, for this wonderful conversation right now. And I hope the listeners has gotten a little bit of an insight into, okay, maybe it is not what this AI thinks is some kind of weird therapy.
Yeah, a little bit, because there's a lot more.
There's a lot more. Stay tuned.